Buddhism and homosexuality, especially what's happening in Australia at the moment.
Yes,
with
I know.
The yes and no vote for equality.
Yes, exactly. Well, you know, I mean, if you look back in the Indian texts at the time of India, 2,500 years ago, and Buddha was Buddha in all the kind of different things that the viewpoints in, you know, about sexual morality, he was probably talking to a married lady and a married gentleman, I would suggest. So then, you know, he would recommend that, you know, you stick to the vagina, please. Don't get too overexcited. Just, you know, be a bit controlled. He's not being fundamentalist. He's not saying you shouldn't have fun, but he probably suggested that boys stick to the vagina, speaking grossly as I do. So basically then, but that's about it, you know. There's no concept of a homosexual. There's not in the literature. There's no word like that, I don't think. And so then there's no concept of being a bad person, because there's no concept that you're made by anybody, and there's no concept there's no concept of we have Christian marriage being a sacrament from God. None of that kind of talk. So looking at it very bluntly, then, you know, maybe it's considered, you know, you try and kind of control your sexual energy, and you can look back at the text 2,500 years ago. But if I think of the world now, I mean, it's first of all, we should mind our own business. I think it's very rude to define a person by whether they eat a piece of meat or a carrot. And I equally think it's really rude to define a person whether they stick a penis in whatever they want or don't have one at all. I think it's mind your own damn business, please. It's bizarre and extraordinary that we run around defining ourselves like this. I mean, that's my personal opinion. Buddha didn't say it like that. So, I mean, please, just, you know, mind our own damn business. So, you know, I remember the Dalai Lama saying one time, well, I could look at the text and argue that maybe, you know, it might be not so this or that, but how could I argue if two people love each other? For God's sake, you know. I mean, it's taken absurdly out of context. So I just think it's a non-issue, in my personal opinion, taking the Buddha's views about things. Do you understand?
Yes.
But mostly mind our own business, please. I mean, how rude to think of, it's so rude to define yourself in terms of what you do in bed with a person. I mean, excuse me, that's embarrassing. Are we communicating here?
Yes.
I mean, you can all have your own opinions. I'm not saying you have to, you know, but I think really give ourselves a break. Be a girl, be a boy, be whatever you like, you know. Come on. Work on your mind, be nice and be loving, and don't get attached and don't cheat and don't be mean. That's the bottom line, you know. Okay. Yes.
Down here. Hello.
Okay, sweetie.
Hi, Robina.
Hi.
I'm curious, I've been reading a lot about surrendering and...
Oh, yeah? Who says that? God, it sounds a bit nerve-wracking. Surrendering.
And so I'm curious in our modern society about the balance between being driven and trying to control things or pushing, and the other, on the other side.
So tell me tell me a bit what whoever you're reading, what they're talking about.
More
what
about
they mean
just
by it.
Surrendering to universal force, allowing things to be, not necessarily pushing against things, being more in flow.
Oh, you know, okay, I hear all those. Yeah, that's nice. It sounds good. Nothing wrong. I'm sincere now. But I think we can grotesquely misinterpret it. So my view is, if I think of that woman on death row, you know, you could say she surrendered, meaning she accepted the reality that she could no point in bashing her head against a brick wall when it was blatantly clear that nobody was going to believe her. That's profoundly intelligent. If you want to call that surrendering, it's a wonderful quality. But I think we can chuck the baby out of the bathwater and become completely passive in misunderstanding that, and that's really dangerous. So that's why I think the Dalai Lama is a great example. Anybody who hears him, he can hear he's a happy guy. He cracks jokes about the Chinese. He does not get angry with them. He's never dropped bombs on them. He doesn't recommend that. But he hasn't stopped for 60 years trying to change the situation. So accepting reality doesn't mean becoming passive. And fighting for something doesn't mean being angry. So it's a really more nuanced point than we tend to think, I think. We've got to be very clear in how we interpret these words. They can sound very lovely. Are we communicating here? And the key to that is not being angry, not being neurotic, not being jealous, not being freaked out, not being full of fear and anguish. And that's a really hard thing to say, because we don't think we can not be that if things go wrong. We think it's natural to freak out when things go wrong. All this view is saying is, no, you can be clear and wise and courageous and not lose the plot and never give up fighting for something, but not be neurotic. It's a very fine point, and we've got to be very clear about it. Do you understand?
Beautiful, thank you.
And that takes enormous courage. Yes.
Hello, Robina.
Hello.
My question is about ego. Now,
Yep.
does ego have any kind of purpose, or is it just part of the human condition?
Ego. Well, I mean, first of all, one of these Greeks, we love these Greek words, you know. God, ego is just a word for I in Greek, isn't it? Ego or something, they say it, you know. And it's a bit like the Spanish, they don't say it much, you know. But that's all, it means I. So however it developed, I don't know, was it Mr. Freud who started using it? Was it? So what did he mean by it? Because it's used very loosely.
Not sure.
Never sure.
Yeah.
No, so I would say the way it's used in Buddhism is all these unhappy neurotic states of mind that we know so well that are so painful, I like to refer to them as like the voices of ego. Because one of the deepest problems, according to the Buddha's view, that is deep beneath the anger, the attachment, the fears and the jealousy and all the dramas, is a primordially deep, ridiculous, wrong sense of I, being separate and lonely and bereft and cut off. So all the voices of ego just reinforce that. When you're really angry or really depressed or really anxious, you're completely separate from everybody else, aren't you? So that's really what the meaning of ego is. And the irony of ego in Buddhism is not some big, strong thing. It's what causes our pain. So it's not the same take on it. We should be really wanting to look at this stuff and own it, because that's what's breaking our hearts, rather than criticising it, you know. But it can be brutal. I mean, why you harm others is because you're totally self-centred and you're totally outrageous, you know. Look at the world. So that's how Buddhism would talk about it. And that this stuff is not at the core of our being. So as we get less neurotic and less anxious and less fearful, you become more kind, more wise and more content. It's like a natural process, you know. And that's opposite to ego. Do you understand? Yeah?
Thank you.
Okay. What else? People? Yes.
Hi. Just going back quickly to what you were saying about the negative self-talk.
Just say it again, darling.
Going back to what you were saying about the negative self-talk in your mind.
I didn't hear what you said. The last little phrase.
The negative self-talk in your
yeah,
mind.
okay.
Is it realistic with practice that it ever goes away, or do you just get better at
No, I
dealing
understand,
or
darling,
focusing?
I understand. Well, okay, if I were to describe how we would be when it really has gone away, you wouldn't believe me. Because this is the Buddha's view from his own experience of the depth to which we can go and develop the goodness and get rid of the badness. So there's nothing remotely like it in our culture. If you were beyond, if you'd really finally got to what the Buddha's saying, that's what they mean by nirvana. It means you've completely rid your mind of all this nonsense. And he would say it takes many lifetimes. I mean, that's his view, you know. And so how you'd be is you'd be utterly blissfully clear. You would never have a single atom of any negative thought. Your mind would be completely clear. You'd have total clairvoyance. You'd see the past, you'd see the future, you'd see the minds of others. All of this is part of the view of the mind in Buddhism, very different from ours. You'd have incredible clarity. You'd be unbelievably compassionate, unbelievably empathetic. More than that, that's just a few qualities. So way to go. But way to go. But the point is, for me, the point is, it doesn't matter if your journey's a million kilometres. If you've got a map and you're confident, then you enjoy the process, don't you? So for me, you know, no way have I got rid of this stuff. But I can say with certainty, without trying to show off, working hard all these years doing this stuff, like I said, trying to put my money where my mouth is, there is absolutely no question. I've radically changed my anger, because it's not just an emotion. This is now another whole discussion. The Buddha's view is what we call emotions. That's when it's full-blown stuff, when the anxiety is unbearable, when the jealousy is too painful. And we call that emotions, don't we? So when you think that you can get rid of emotions, it sounds very peculiar. How can you do that, you know? It seems so raw and so primordial. Our body's involved in it. It's so intense. But the Buddha would say that our emotions are just the tip of the iceberg, that we only notice though when it hits the body, which is at the emotional level. But using these skills and developing this habit to go ever more deep into your mind, you get to these much more subtle, elaborate, conceptual stories deep in the bones of our being that are informing those emotions. And it's at that level you do the radical change of reconfiguring your very viewpoints about things. So what I mean by that is the things that would have made me angry before, say, I became a Buddhist, completely do not make me angry now because I interpret them differently. It's like the woman in prison. She decided she'd see prison differently. My friend Mitch lives in this garbage dump. He's considered to be an animal. He's on death row. But his mind is happy. He's nothing magic. He hasn't pulled a bit of his brain out. He has got a different interpretation of his situation, of the people, of his environment, so he's got a happy mind. I mean, he hasn't got rid of them, but I can say the same with me with certainty. You reinterpret things. It's like Buddha's like a cognitive therapist. And that's why it demands that we've got to start listening to all we've got so many assumptions about things. So anger, in a sense, is an assumption. How dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. That's an assumption. So we've got to unpack those assumptions. They're all really all the emotions we have, which we only notice when they're like Vesuvius exploding out. We've got to go deeper and unpack and unpack and unpack. Does that make sense to you? That's the job. And then you change your very way of interpreting something. So, but we know this. I mean, we know we can do it. Your sister, you learn to forgive your sister, which means you start to think of your sister's good qualities. You start to you start to stop focusing on her bad qualities. You talk to each other. You remember some good things, and you kiss and make up. You've changed your mind. You've reinterpreted your sister. There's nothing mystical about it. Are we communicating? So I think the fact that we can know we can change, that these viewpoints aren't set in stone, then that's what brings more peace itself. Then you learn to live with the stuff that's there, but it's a kind of it's like you're a work in progress. Do you understand what I'm saying? Are you sure? Good, I'm happy. Okay, what else, people?